Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Amelia, if you could start my slides, that would be great. I'm Forman, a professor of political science and founding director of the Center on Global Justice at the University of California, San Diego. I also serve as co-chair of the University of California President's Global Climate Leadership Council, advising on climate and sustainability policy, research, and education. I'm honored to facilitate this panel on centering equity and resilience planning. Thanks so much to Louise and Sigrid, Nguyen, Tara, and Carly for the extremely helpful framing conversation about how to accelerate subnational action at regional and local scales, and a really novel orientation to the adaptation continuum. Our panels today will continue to explore the key elements of a resilience blueprint and how to advance them. We wanted this panel on equity, on centering equity, to come first, to set a tone and situate our discussions today, guided by questions like how to center equity and what does success look like. Yesterday, I briefly introduced you to the UCSD community stations and shared one of them with you, a refugee sanctuary we developed at the edges of Tijuana. Doing this deeply grounded community resilience work in the border region for the last 12 years has provoked lots of thinking about what it means to co-produce solutions to societal challenges like climate resilience and adaptation in a disrupted civic space like ours. For us, working together always begins with a commitment to decolonizing knowledge. We're keenly attuned to power dynamics when institutions like universities, like government agencies, arrive in communities. And we've become critical of sort of extractive research methods and humanitarian problem-solving missions. We engage in horizontal practices of co-production, engaging communities as partners with knowledge and agency. Everyone contributes, everyone learns, and we do things together in the border region that no one could do alone. Institutions with power too often take for granted the resources that communities invest when they advise us and when they partner with us: time, space, social capital, labor, and knowledge. As a matter of epistemic justice and labor equity, these contributions need to be respected, radically respected, and compensated. Centering equity in planning practices is not a box-ticking exercise. Deep engagement is a learned skill that becomes habitual over time and grounds trusting relationships. Our panelists today bring together diverse perspectives and expertise in policy, planning, and community leadership. All are committed to centering equity in resilience planning and implementation. Each will share their experiences and distill lessons that we hope will resonate and inspire creative thinking about process. So let me introduce them now, and then we will launch in. Natalie Hernandez is a specialist in community resilience and climate equity. She currently holds the position of environmental project manager at the Gateway Cities Council of Governments, a sub-regional joint powers authority established by its 27 member cities and the County of Los Angeles in Southeast Los Angeles County. And she co-leads the Gateway Cities Regional Climate Collaborative. Kristen Torres-Pauling is Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Planning in the Office of Los Angeles Councilwoman Katie Yaroslavsky. Connor Magee is a natural and working land specialist focused on conserving, restoring, and managing Southern California ecosystems. As a Pala tribe citizen, he integrates his tribal community work with his PhD research at UC Davis in ecology. He also serves on the expert advisory councils of CNRA and CARB as a tribal advisor for California's 5th Climate Change Assessment and Tribal Research Program. Matthew Sinclair, my colleague, is the first Chief Sustainability Officer for the University of California system, based in the Office of the President, and has been leading sustainability efforts across the 10-campus UC system since 2004. I've had the great privilege of working with Matt over the last decade on various university-led climate initiatives and learned a great deal from him about how a massive public institution like ours can center equity in its resilience planning. And finally, Julia Kim is a partnerships lead at Farallon Strategies, a certified B Corp supporting transformative change in climate resilience, governance, policies, and projects in California and beyond. In this role, she collaborates with local and regional partners to build capacity, design strategic initiatives, and mobilize coalitions to advance equitable climate resilience priorities. So this is an amazing panel. And it's not just a conversation, but really a call to action. So let's dive in. Each speaker, you can stop my slides. Each speaker will present for 8 or 9 minutes. I will intervene at 10 minutes to ensure that we preserve time for interaction. I should say that 2 of our panelists, Natalie, who will go first, and Julia, who will go last, will be using Zoom polls in their presentations. So please be ready to engage the polls during our session. They'll just pop up on your screen. Okay, so I'll turn things over now to Natalie.
Thank you, Fauna. Thank you, Fauna. Can you all start my slides? So hello, everyone. I'm excited to be on this panel today to tell you about myself and my work, and especially because I get to lean into my Catholicism, which has been influential in my career. I'm the eldest daughter in a Latino family, and I grew up in a Catholic household, going to church almost every Sunday and attending religious education. Furthermore, I went to Loyola Marymount University, which is a Catholic Jesuit university. And you might know that the Pope himself is a Jesuit. And Jerry Brown, our former governor and speaker later today, was also a Jesuit seminarian, and he attended Jesuit schools. The Jesuit education is unique because it emphasizes service to the whole person, service to others, and a connection to God. And for me, that upbringing is really important because during my academic studies and volunteerism, I got called and through an eco-epiphany, was involved in the environmental movement. So I find this work deeply personal and deeply spiritual. Furthermore, early in my career, I learned what environmental justice was and environmental pollution because my mom was a bilingual kindergarten teacher in West Long Beach, and her school was next to a freeway and a refinery. And the teachers and parents there in the late 2000s advocated for air filters and vegetation barrier between the freeway and the playground. However, that didn't overturn the land use decision that cited a school next to a freeway. And when I was working for state government in 2013, I discovered that my mom's school wasn't really unique, that pollution was a scenario that happened a lot to communities that were immigrant and low-income families. And there was actually a mapping tool to map that out, CalEnviroscreen. And there were a lot of communities like hers across the state dealing with their unfair share of pollution, as well as subsequently climate change. So being a Catholic environmentalist and public servant under the Jerry Brown administration really radicalized me. And I did work in environmental planning and outreach to different communities. I started to utilize my skills speaking Spanish and doing that outreach and talking about climate change. And I do remember when Pope Francis first published his encyclical letter, Laudato Si, in 2015. And I first bought the book in Spanish so that I could learn some of the Spanish terminology and that my grandpa could also read it so we could discuss it together. Next slide. So all of my jobs the past 15 years have centered equity with making climate change relatable in engagement and making sure tech terminology is accessible in different languages. I've also had to co-define what does resilience mean with different communities, and I love that the definition encompasses identifying vulnerabilities and strengths in communities that are unique to each neighborhood and network. So the term resilience reminds me every day that residents, government, and ecosystems need to work together for solutions. And I have a question for the audience as I start to give my own examples of resilience. So Fauna, can you launch that poll? Great. So the question is, how is your community creating climate solutions? And while you think about and select your answers, I'll tell you about the photos here on the slide. The first one is my husband, Leonardo, who's an outdoor worker. He's a trash refuse operator and was featured in the LA Times in September 2022. That was during the longest, hottest heat wave in Southern California. We had, it was about for 10 days. And in Long Beach, where we live, the temperature rose to 109 degrees. And his story was written in the LA Times articles alongside other outdoor professionals. And outdoor professionals like construction workers and delivery drivers are one of the most vulnerable populations because they risk their lives and health for their jobs during heat waves. And as a solution, it's important to advocate for these type of workers, make sure that they have safety precautions and their employers are allowing them to get shade and air conditioning and take ample breaks to cool off and stay hydrated. And the other three projects here on this slide is when I used to work at Climate Resolve, one of the co-hosts today, and a nonprofit in Los Angeles. During the almost 6 years I was there, I was engaged with the community on the topic of extreme heat. And alongside my colleagues, we have taken grants for trees and cool pavement and roofs, as well as hydration stations and parks, zero emission vehicles, and shuttles in disadvantaged communities. So one of my favorite projects on there is this emergency preparedness class that we helped develop and use the Listos California curriculum that's sponsored by the state. And in order to make it fun, we called it Camping 101 in Emergency Preparedness. And we taught residents how to use the teamwork and the skills that they use in camping to also apply it to emergency preparedness so that a disaster becomes less fearful. I think, Fauna, you closed the poll, right? So we can see it on our screens.
Yes, the poll is closed and the results are now revealed.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, because there's so much more I can tell you all, but I'm really curious about the projects that you have been doing. So in looking at the poll with you all, I'm seeing that overwhelmingly, a lot of you are working on implementing on the ground projects. And I think that's so important to communities so that they're seeing the tangible results of their time spent with government. A lot of times planning processes take a while and we want to show communities those results. It seems like most of you are also working on climate planning processes and education and outreach, so that's awesome. And then vulnerability assessments and applying for grants, a lesser percentage. So I really appreciate this. I'll take a snapshot of it and kind of remember it as I go more into my work, and really share gratitude for all of you and the work that you're doing in your communities. Next slide. So to finish my opening remarks, I want to tell you about an exciting effort that's happening in the gateway cities where I currently work. We have 5 partners, including the Council of Governments, the Sella Collaborative, Grid Alternatives, and Tree People, as well as the LA County Chief Sustainability Office that are working together for the Gateway Cities Regional Climate Collaborative. And we're uplifting the voices and the needs of 10 small urban communities in Southeast Los Angeles. We do this through engagement. We do this by inviting residents, organizations, and elected leaders to participate in the process with us and lead it. As Fauna was mentioning, our general area is about 27 cities, but we decided to focus the smaller effort on these cities. They are characterized by being highly polluted by the 710 freeway that has a lot of diesel trucks that run through it, getting goods from the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach to the rest of the nation. And the community is also characterized by being 93% Latino, and total, it's very dense with the housing and the transportation. And there's about 417,000 people in that area. So the establishment of the collaborative is actually supported by a state program called the Strategic Growth Council Regional Climate Collaboratives Program. And it's a capacity building grant for 3 years of $1.75 million. We're doing cross-sectoral partnerships that deepen relationships and strengthen local coordination, knowledge, and skills. And I like to call it like a pre-planning grant, where we are tasked with building that social infrastructure that the government and nonprofits need to work together to advance climate action. And so we're currently identifying our region's projects. We're currently surveying our community residents to address their needs. And I'd love for you all to follow us on LinkedIn to learn more about our collaborative and to keep track of our efforts. So I'll end my talking points by saying that I was very inspired by the youth yesterday. I really liked that they continued to push the adults in the room, wanting us to be more radicalized for change, to be bigger and do it at a faster pace. So I want to encourage the folks that are listening today to think about the power and the influence that they have every day in their lives and in their jobs, and to have that urgency for the sake and care of our common home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Moving next to Kristen.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks, Natalie. I did notice we got a Q&A about spotlighting the speaker. So moving past the logistics, I want to thank the organizers of the event. I think, as everybody has echoed, this was a major pivot to move from an online event that was going to take a lot of effort anyways. Just took so much more effort to pull off, and so successfully. Just looking at our participant list here, like every time I open it, there's just another like striking name on here of powerhouse women, men, and people who have joined to this conversation. So hello to all of you out there, because it's really humbling to have you listen in on this. And just to opening, like who I am and why I do this work, I have a very similar personal story to Natalie's. And we're friends and colleagues for years now. And I think that sort of speaks to, our opening panel this morning spoke about sort of scaling. And I think so much of climate resilience work and people who come to it is a kind of a person to person or like individual type of small community conversations, like lead people to be very passionate about this work. And I think that's the case for me. And when you think about scaling that's really hard. But I think that is that lighting the fire for individuals is so important to keeping you going and being optimistic in this very difficult work, which I feel like only gets more difficult over time to feel that level of optimism that we can keep going and be successful here and as we build climate resilience. And I also think of, and I don't have any slides, so just be looking at me here, but I personally also think of this work and as climate resilience, but just climate and environment sustainability as a vocation as well. And I think that just is a driving force for me personally. So I'm going to talk about sort of two big themes. One in the previous hat that I was wearing at the LA County Sustainability Office, which Natalie referenced as a partner in that transformative collaborative that Natalie is co-leading at the South Gateway Cities. That was an effort to outline a bold, inclusive, and truly regional vision for LA, the past and future, or present and future generations of LA, on sustainability, which hadn't been done before. And that was actually, so I'm, as I was introduced, I'm Deputy Chief of Staff for LA Councilwoman Katie Yaroslavsky, and she was really one of the key drivers of recognizing, when she was a deputy for former Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, that LA didn't have a cohesive vision for what regional sustainability meant, which was kind of striking when you stepped back and realized that. So that led to the creation of the Chief Sustainability Office and this outlining of that vision. And I think the most important part in terms of our conversation today is the fact that we defined what we meant by equity. And that was a few pieces: procedural equity, which I think is kind of one of the most deep touches that we did, distributional equity, and structural equity, and transgenerational equity. So I'm going to emphasize the procedural equity pieces that we undertook there. That was the example of that being that our county was working with community-based organizations to engage stakeholders in the development of every part of the plan, and that included funding. Instead of just asking people to come to the table, here are actual resources depending on your level of need to come to the table. And that led to, and that piece plus the other pieces of how we define equity led to a pretty radical document, actually. There's 12 goals in the sustainability plan. The only one I can rattle off to you now, even years after writing it, is the goal that says a fossil fuel free Los Angeles. And that is a goal in a document adopted by a legislative body. That's pretty radical. And I think we would be nowhere near a goal like that, having been sort of, blessed is the wrong word, but adopted by elected officials, that unless we had really leaned into equity and centering equity in the process, because that came up from, and you could hear the voices, and the elected officials came and saw and heard their constituents speaking to the need for this type of bold change. So that was sort of what I was doing, from 8 to 5 years ago. And that document, I encourage folks to check out, the Our County Sustainability Plan, if you have not already. Many of you who are here helped co-create it. So that's a beautiful thing. And you can continue to be the cheerleaders for that process as it gets re-upped, now that it's 5 years out. And I'm going to speak now, switching to, the councilwoman got elected. She felt so strongly about this work that she ran for elected office. If you ask her why she ran for office, a big part of it was this climate work and what she was able to achieve, and the belief that government can actually make positive change and this Our County plan was part of it. And I think one of the beautiful things of that plan is also a fossil fuel free Los Angeles. We were talking about reducing the demand for fossil fuel. We were talking about reducing the supply for fossil fuel. Much of it in California and Los Angeles specifically continues to be a fossil fuel producer. And we were talking about climate resilience and adaptation all at the same time. And I think that's a theme that she brought to her work in LA City Council and the work that I helped lead on her behalf. And one of the key achievements that we're so proud of so far, and I think I can put this in the chat, is at the close of this year, or last year, the councilwoman announced the agreement to close the West Pico drill site in the Pico Robertson neighborhood. That is far ahead of when sorry, I sent that only to Cecilia Estelano, the host in the panel. Sorry, I meant to send it already. Thank you, Natalie. And that is part of the our priority of closing neighborhood drill sites. And for those who don't know, the 5th Council District in LA, it is West LA. It includes neighborhoods from Bel Air to Palms. So it's a very diverse neighborhood, but it is West LA, right? And we did that closure, and it was based on legislative initiatives that included other parts of the city that have greater environmental injustices and the compounding environmental injustices, and that are different than the 5th Council District. So we have been doing that work in an effort, and continue to partner with environmental justice organizations to think of what we're doing here as a blueprint that can be transferred to other parts of the city. And we've been intentional about that in the legislation that has led to this voluntary closure with one of the oil companies who operates in LA. And I also want to mention that it's kind of another striking thing when you step back and think about climate action in LA, is that the city of LA doesn't actually have a climate action and adaptation plan. And the councilwoman wanted to address that. And that was one of her first 3 pieces of legislation when she took office. The RFP for that is actually closing March 6th. So if you haven't already taken a look, please do. And then more, I reference it because thinking about centering equity and doing a climate adaptation plan in the year 2025, we don't think it's going to be going out and doing deep dive conversations with community in every single neighborhood, because those conversations have been had. in a lot of places. And I think another piece that we're sort of in the stage of when we're talking about sort of large scale planning efforts, especially on climate, we feel like we can't go back to communities over and over again and ask when voices have articulated needs for change. So we're really kind of putting together a document that council could adopt and would live on the legislative books, as opposed to City of LA has done lots of great climate work, but it's been kind of in different pieces, and the whole of it hadn't been adopted by council. So we're really excited for that process to fully begin, and would invite folks to follow that, and we'll be sharing out that information so that you can engage in it. And I didn't talk about the fire, but I think, I'm happy to go there. And we're kind of all still reeling from it. We can probably talk about that in the question, but I'll pause there and pass it back to Fauna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kristen. Turning next to Connor.
Across okay on audio?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, thank you for that first slide. And yeah, I'll go ahead and echo the panel. I'm really impressed with the organization of this conference, the agenda alone, the presenters, the invitees, and then being able to transition. So I'm going to go ahead and echo that applause of pulling this off so well. And thank you, Natalie, for sharing your story. Really thinking about, the why, how we ended up in these places and how we ended up, with our life's work. It really started at, those tender young ages that defined out, my community and how I ended up here, and how it's so rooted in what we refer to as, our creation stories and our transitions of knowledge and our responsibilities that are, given to us from generations that led up to this point, and the responsibilities that we have to the present and to our future generations. And for us, in my community, that's rooted deep in our creation story. And if I just even give the example of gathering, spending time with a basket weaver, gathering materials, intertwined in all of those stories and all of that richness, and that intergenerational exchange is sustainability, is resilience, is adaptation. Our stories teach us about what we don't refer to, but in these spaces we can refer to as climate change and climate resilience. The stories of our villages, being out in the ocean when they used to be on land, the lakes and the rivers that existed, that have changed, that have morphed. All of these things are written into our stories, our histories that are intertwined in our creation story. And that's what, ties together everything that I do. So I thank you so much for sharing that. It took my mind to that place, and it's so rich to when you're listening to somebody, knowing where they're coming from with their work. So here's my first slide. Sorry, it's Connor. I'm here representing essentially the fifth assessment and the tribal advisory group that I've been spending years with and working with on the assessment and the tribal research program through the California Energy Commission. Can we jump to the next slide, please? And so, as we know, with the national assessment, and in this case, the fifth assessment for California, there are dramatic impacts to environmental shifts that we're all experiencing, and the assessments are very much a state of the science and pathways moving forward, researchable questions, science-based needs, and there are communities that are disproportionately feeling the effects of these shifts, and our tribal communities in California are one of them. And so the state, via the last fourth assessment, heard the call to provide special attention, right, to tribal communities' needs. We have a unique relationship with the federal government. We have a unique relationship with the Constitution to the United States. We have a unique relationship to the state of California that is unparalleled to any other community. So the state allocated funding and pulled their resources together to invest in tribal communities' research agendas. Could we go to the next slide, please? And so via the tribal advisory group, advisory group had been assembled very early on, going years back, to advise on the fifth assessment, to advise on the tribal research program. These inaugural programs, this inaugural group, it's the first time that California has ever done it in their assessment. And it's the first time they funded climate-based research for tribes. And there's a lot of unique things that are happening within our group too that I'm not normally seen within state and federal agencies. And essentially what we're doing is we're providing guidance and protocols to engaging with tribes. And a lot of that, I'm guessing that a lot of us have heard of TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, tribal knowledges, tribal science, indigenous science, across a lot of the proposals that are going out through federal and state agencies are calling for people to engage with tribes, to embrace indigenous science, indigenous knowledges into their planning, into their research. And so we're sort of helping with the process of that. And one of the really main things that, to point number 2, like what does it mean to build meaningful relationships with tribes when doing this work? How do you do it is the challenge. And a lot of what I'll be talking about is sort of like how we've been able to do that, both being embedded in the state agency work in a variety of different ways. The Tribal Advisory Group, our community members, our staff members from various tribes throughout the entire state. And this is representing hundreds of tribes, hundreds of different languages, hundreds of different cultures throughout the political boundaries of California, the diversity that exists in that alone, the challenges that exist from the backgrounds of all of these different sovereign nations, having different resources, having different priorities. There's a lot of challenges that a lot of folks aren't aware of. And so the Tribal Advisory Group being embedded throughout that process as community members, but also at LCI, we also have tribal community members on staff. And that is a lot of the uniqueness of this being successful, both on the staff level and the advisory level. Tribes are involved throughout the entire process. And it's not what you think of that formal consultation process, of that government to government consultation process. It's not a go around, but also including community members for that guidance and expertise and contributing to the assessment and the research program. And we can go to the next slide, please. And so this is sort of what it looks like to provide a visual. The assessment has been going on. The Tribal Advisory Group had been assembled. A couple of years ago. I'm always bad with dates. I want to say 2, but I feel like it's been 3. And then there's the Tribal Research Program where you see tribal research grants. Something really important in this process took place that is worth noting, and it's again, how do you accomplish this? Sovereignty for tribes is paramount. It's been eroded over time via acts of Congress. It's been eroded over time throughout the state of California. There isn't a tribe in California that has a ratified treaty with the federal government or the state. 100% of the footprint of California, the geographical locations within the political boundaries of the state, have never been signed over to any government or any foreign entity. All tribes within California retain their sovereignty, retain to have power over their information, their lands, their stories. And this is something that's really important that tribes really put at the forefront of all of their work: knowledge and data sovereignty. We manage our information, we manage our knowledge, and we decide how we use it. And that's something that's taking place here in this program. Tribes have the sovereignty to, when awarded through the research program, how they use the funds for their research, and how that is disseminated or shared, whether or not it is. And it doesn't have to be, it's not a requirement. And that's something that we've been able to accomplish through the Tribal Advisory Group, working with the state. It's like, this is how it should best be done. And also that while this is under the umbrella of the 5th assessment, the research program and the research grants that are awarded have the option to opt in or opt out, including that in the assessment. It's not something there's in the sort of the strings attached way that we think of a lot of state funds going out for research. And that's something that we really push forward because, this was an important part of forming relationships with tribes, and then being able to maintain their sovereignty, not to advocate for them themselves, but at the forefront, on the leading end of it, that it's embedded into the programming. How am I in time? I feel like I've already been talking a lot, but I have a couple minutes.
We're at 8.5 minutes, Connor.
Oh, okay, great. I checked in right on time. So, I will go ahead and leave it there and leave space for everyone else, and I'm sure we'll be able to cover some more of these topics as we move forward. Questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, moving it over to Matt Sinclair.
Thank you, Fauna. I'm really honored to be part of this panel. Some amazing other panelists. Thank you for pulling up the slides. As you heard yesterday from UC President Drake, the University of California system is committed to advancing climate resilience. You've also heard from several UC professors about their groundbreaking research and inspiring work on community resilience. So I'm going to share 4 examples of system-wide initiatives that highlight how UC is advancing equity-centered climate resilience across our entire mission of research, teaching, and public service. Before I do that, I do want to share my story, since Natalie set us off on a good starting point. I grew up in the Inland Empire in Southern California and Ontario with very bad asthma. I was a frequent visitor of the urgent care at Kaiser Fontana Hospital, and was fortunate my parents managed to get me transferred to a public school up in Mount Baldy Village. So I took a school bus up the mountain and then could see the air that I was breathing when I came back home every day. And that image of that inversion layer over that valley is permanently imprinted in my head. So that's part of my origin story in coming to this work. So you can go to the next slide. So first, UC is a research university, and the first example that I want to highlight is UC's historic partnership with the state of California to invest in climate action research and innovation projects throughout the state. The California legislature in 2022 designated $100 million to the UC Office of the President for the California Climate Action Initiative. And this initiative aims to make real-world impacts on climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience in California. And the funds were divided between 2 grant programs that you see on the left and right sides of the screen, and awarded by the UC Office of the President in 2023. So on the left side, the seed and matching grants went to 38 teams across the state, led by UC and Cal State researchers. These grants fund solutions that directly address state climate priorities, and they focus on communities most vulnerable to climate change. The research teams include not just academics, but more than 130 community organizations, tribal groups, businesses, and public agencies. As you can see by the map, these projects reach every portion of California. On the right side of the slide, the UC Climate Action Innovation and Entrepreneurship Awards went to UC's major research entities. These projects leverage innovation and entrepreneurship resources that already exist across UC to address climate resiliency. Now, the funded projects are addressing the climate crisis from all directions, integrating nature-based solutions and equity and environmental justice, like we heard Governor Newsom call for yesterday. Some examples include mitigating wildfire risks to communities, developing new climate-smart agriculture techniques, using nature-based solutions to combat effects of sea level rise and biodiversity loss, providing farm workers with strategies to cope with extreme heat and pollution, developing technologies such as less toxic large-scale batteries, and increasing the resilience of state water and power systems to disasters. Because climate needs are so urgent and these funds are supposed to have real-world impacts, these are 2-year awards. We can move to the next slide. The second example is the Community Academic Partnerships for Equity-Focused Climate Action, or CAPICA. CAPICA is exploring how participatory action research can be community-driven to center equity and most effectively meet community resilience needs. There are several equity-related key outcomes from this initiative, but for the sake of time, I'll just mention one. The community academic partnership teams are playing an active role in influencing local and regional climate planning efforts, advocating for community-led solutions. By design, the project has included a comprehensive evaluation, which has already identified several important lessons learned by the CAPICA facilitation team. One of those lessons learned is about how to address power dynamics and equitable partnerships. And Fawn already touched on this in her opening comments, in the historical extractive nature of too much of academics' work with communities. So the facilitation team consistently grappled with the issue of power dynamics between academic partners and community members. The design team deployed coaching teams as needed to help the community academic partnership teams avoid extractive research practices and ensure that community members were in the driver's seat. This included addressing issues such as who funds the work, building community members' capacity for grant writing processes, and how to value and incorporate lived experience. They also addressed how to balance community needs with the requirements and expectations of academic partners. Go to the next slide, please. So the third initiative comes out of UC's education mission. Bending the Curve Climate Change Solutions is an undergraduate course that launched in 2018 under the direction of Professors Ramanathan and Forman, who are also behind this whole summit. And within UC has reached more than 2,000 students on 8 campuses through the current winter quarter. In 2023, the Bending the Curve project designed and developed 8 new video lectures focused on themes of risk, resilience, and adaptation. Now, the course is available now to the general public as a massive open online course, and over a number of years, it's had nearly 2,000 enrollments on the UC San Diego campus platform. It's now available on Coursera, and within less than a year has over 400 enrollments. At the K through 12 level, we heard yesterday that President Drake announced that the LA Unified School District will make the content library available for this course to as many as 1,700 staff and teachers in the first year of a new partnership with UC, with plans to develop student-facing curricula in the future. And additionally, the course is running at 6 high schools this spring semester, with a total enrollment of 102 students through UC's partnership with the Education Equity Lab. Second course listed here is a system-wide, or the other two are 2 other system-wide courses that we've sponsored through our system-wide climate change initiative. The middle one here that is from the UC Center for Climate, Health, and Equity. We heard about a lot yesterday in their mental health initiative. It's co-led by Dr. Mishra, who you heard from yesterday. She and her partners or collaborators launched a climate resilience course designed to promote hope, collective empowerment, and serve as a map for individual climate action projects integrated within our communities. So the course launched in the spring of 2024 and immediately was offered on 8 campuses to nearly 160 students. This year, it's running on all 10 UC campuses during the spring terms. And if you're interested in learning more, NPR did a great story on it in the fall. The third course highlighted here is from UC's Center for Climate Justice, who launched a system-wide climate justice course with lectures organized across its 6 pillars of climate justice: just transition, social, racial, and environmental justice, indigenous climate action, community resilience and adaptation, natural climate solutions, and climate education and engagement. Drawing inspiration from a long history of social justice movements, this course seeks to educate a new generation of climate justice changemakers through a series of transformative lectures centering around intersectional issues of equity and using a holistic systems perspective. You go to the next slide. So the fourth and final system-wide initiative I'll highlight today seeks to practice what UC teaches and how we design and operate our own campuses and healthcare facilities. This is a multi-year equity-centered climate resilience planning initiative to prepare the entire UC community for the risks associated with climate change. Recognizing that climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable and underrepresented communities, UC prioritized early and ongoing stakeholder engagement to shape our approach. UC locations engaged diverse stakeholders, including student affinity groups, equity offices, including basic needs and disability services, and different staff divisions to ensure their voices shaped our resilience strategies. Community engagement efforts included surveys, tabling events, and climate-focused discussion groups. One campus's survey revealed that climate change is already affecting our campus communities, with 66% of survey respondents reporting mental health impacts from climate change, and over 30% citing financial and physical strain from climate change. At another location, these assessments highlighted unrecognized risks to vulnerable communities, like how drought might impact the campus farm that provides food for the food pantry, or the impact that campus evacuations due to wildfire would have on unhoused and international students. Across locations, vulnerable groups, including staff with high exposure jobs, expressed concerns about working in extreme heat and smoke, and concerns surfaced about how climate disruption could interfere with staffing for essential services like dining and healthcare. So UC's system-wide Office of Emergency Management and Business Continuity is now incorporating future climate risks and equity considerations for the first time into campus hazard vulnerability assessments. And this is a model that UC has pioneered, and now other universities around the country are following our example. UC is committed to actively working to create near-term and long-term adaptive solutions that ensure the safety, well-being, and resilience of its campuses and surrounding communities. Now, this is, of course, not an exhaustive list of what UC is doing to advance equity-centered climate resilience, but it hopefully gives you a sense of the range of activities and what UC is learning along the way about centering equity in these efforts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. And we turn finally to Julia Kim. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Dr. Forman, and thank you to everyone involved in organizing this summit and everyone joining us for this session. I'm excited to be on this panel to share a bit about how service is critical to building climate resilience. So here in California, we of course don't have to imagine the impacts of climate change. We've lived through them. We know just how devastating wildfires, floods, droughts, extreme heat can be to our communities, our most vulnerable populations, our infrastructure, and our natural resources and ecosystems that sustain all life. And in the face of these growing threats, we've been anything but idle. We've been actively working to assess our climate risks and vulnerabilities, understand our community's needs and priorities, and develop policies, plans, and projects aimed at building climate resilience. We have an ever-growing compendium of data, research, models, tools, toolkits, reports, and strategies right at our fingertips. So in many ways, we know what needs to be done. What's missing is the capacity to do it. And implementing the community-wide, landscape scale, multi-sector, transformative, equitable solutions we need to truly adapt to climate impacts, well, that's going to require quite a bit of capacity. So many of you have likely felt the weight of this cycle. Community-based organizations, local governments, and state agencies alike lack the funding and people power needed to drive and sustain comprehensive solutions. Without sufficient capacity, policies don't fully translate into action, projects are implemented in piecemeal fashion, opportunities for community-driven solutions are lost, and we ultimately sacrifice long-term resilience for short-term recovery. This forces us into a reactive response that falls short of meeting community needs. It can deepen inequities and further complicate our path forward. And then we end up right back where we started, only now with demands to do even more with even less. And of course, despite these challenges, we find sparks of brilliance and innovation all across California when it comes to climate resilience. You heard about some of these solutions during this session and throughout the summit. We're making meaningful progress on many of you, and I think it's 73% of you, according to Natalie's poll, are already implementing projects on the ground. I think that really speaks to the sheer determination and creativity and courage of our community of practice to drive action. But chronic capacity gaps continue to be a systemic issue in our field that truly stands in the way of achieving our equitable climate resilience vision. And this is where climate service programs come in, not just as a stopgap, but as a long-term strategy to help transform this cycle of capacity constraints into a cycle of action and resilience. Next slide, please. So climate service programs vary in structure, but they generally match students, recent graduates, or emerging professionals with government agencies or nonprofits to provide low-cost, short-term support for climate-focused projects. So these include AmeriCorps programs and fellowships like Civic Spark, Climate Action Corps, College Corps, Conservation Corps, Grizzly Corps, I mean, the list goes on. And the benefits of these climate service programs are truly exponential and enduring. So first, partners, capacity-constrained organizations can receive immediate support on a variety of climate resilience projects. That can involve research, planning, community engagement, education, or implementation. This really frees up valuable staff time to work on other critical priorities. This immediate capacity boost can keep projects moving to deliver real results. Fellows also offer a phenomenal opportunity for local governments to expand and deepen community engagement efforts, which we all know requires a considerable amount of staff time to get it right. Fellows can also bring fresh perspectives and challenge our conventional approaches that can inspire innovative solutions and new partnerships. And in turn, fellows receive a multitude of benefits. Climate service programs act as a career accelerator for recent graduates and those newly entering our climate ecosystem. Fellows gain hands-on experience working on climate resilience projects while also receiving tailored training and mentorship, which fast-tracks their professional development. I'll also note that the cohort-based structure of service programs also allows fellows to learn from their peers and build a strong network. That's a rather rare and invaluable opportunity for early career professionals. And these service programs are at the forefront of attracting new talent and building a workforce pipeline to sustain our movement. It's no secret that we're facing an aging public agency workforce. And by engaging the next generation of leaders, service programs are essential to addressing this emerging workforce gap while also strengthening human capital for climate resilience long into the future. So clearly, I am a big fan. I very well may be preaching to the choir here. So I'm going to launch a poll. Hopefully I did that right. I'm really curious to know, how have you participated in climate service programs? Whether you are or were an AmeriCorps member, a project partner or host site, if you administered a service program, if you've supported service programs in other ways. Yeah, I'm going to let those responses come in, and I'll quickly share my personal story. I was inspired by Natalie sharing yours, and mine is a bit different. I'm a child of immigrant parents, and I didn't know much about civic engagement growing up. I also worked throughout high school and college, sometimes 2 to 3 jobs, so I didn't have time for internships or volunteer work. So when I graduated with my master's in environmental policy, I was stuck between being overqualified with experience and underqualified with education. Overqualified with education and underqualified with experience. And I was lucky enough to find out about an AmeriCorps program, which was the first step to launching my career in climate. So I have personally benefited tremendously from climate service programs. Okay, I still see responses coming in, so I'm going to keep that poll live. And can we move to the next slide, please? All right, so climate service programs are growing across the country pretty rapidly at that. And we're pretty fortunate here in California to have such an abundance of available programs. So I encourage you to explore these further and consider participating, not only to build your team's capacity in the near term, but to really invest in the next generation of climate leaders that we know we need to make equitable climate resilience a reality for all communities. And I'll share those results. I'll also note that Farallon Strategy serves as a national hub for climate service. So we welcome you to reach out if you have any questions. And before I wrap up, I really need to give credit where credit's due. My colleague, Kif Scheuer, has been absolutely instrumental to the expansion of climate service nationwide, and that is not an exaggeration. He's had a hand in launching and shaping multiple programs in California, a number of those that you see up on the screen, as well as in Colorado, Maryland, Florida, North Carolina, Michigan, and probably a couple others that I am missing. So a big thank you to Kif. Thank you to all climate service members and partners, past and present, and to all of you for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Forman.
Thank you so much. Truly, thanks all of you for being here today. I'm inspired. I'm sure we all are. I'm moved. I'll never forget images of some of your personal stories. Natalie sharing Laudato Si in Spanish with her grandfather. You know, a young Matt Sinclair ascending from the valley air on a school bus. These are beautiful stories and help to link personal experience to our passion and commitment for this work. We have just a few minutes left, and I thought I would put one question out there. And maybe you could just share a quick thought, all of you, about this. So a through line in your narratives is that community participation and resilience planning is more than an ethical imperative, but also a pragmatic one that produces stronger and more sustainable, solutions. So can you each please distill from your experiences one key takeaway of how we can coordinate better, how governments, organizations, community groups, individuals can work together to drive systemic change. Distill just one takeaway. Who'd like to go first?
I can kick it off quickly. One would be, don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel if you don't need to. There are a number of regional collaboratives that have formed and are newly forming all across the state. So I encourage you to get plugged into existing networks where you can, and then bring others in with you, to especially any critical voices that are missing.
Thanks, Julia.
And then one thing I think about is there's a lot of government folks in the room today, and I've had the opportunity to apply to a lot of grant programs, whether that's state or federal. And I find that guidelines sometimes have more flexibility if you have a champion within the government than, just going back and forth between legal counsel. And I really appreciate those folks who have found flexibility in grant guidelines to give the community what they need. And so I would encourage folks to, if they are that person, to kind of problem solve with grantees around how to fund things like food. I once had a grant manager tell me, like, you can't pay for water, like at your event, that's considered food. And I said, but we need water, emergency preparedness, or like things that we were trying to do. And it just felt really silly until, they went back and tried to figure it out with their grant supervisor. So I think about the political will and like just the ability that people have in their everyday jobs to like try to figure it out and increase percentages of funding that can go to community engagement. And so I think that's a pragmatic thing to do.
I'll go next. Super appreciate that. And the next is just to call each other. Right. I think that we have ideas, and I like bouncing ideas off each other. And I like, even for today, I was like, oh, I just need to talk to Natalie before this. And like all these, things came forth. So just continuing those personal relationships with each other as we continue to do this very hard work, and to expand those relationships and to grow your circle.
Kristen, your comments remind me, so often institutions come and go with the wind, and communities are skeptical of, we've noticed this in the university. Communities have become really skeptical of research universities who arrive with a question and then disappear, and then the next week somebody else arrives from the university with a question and then disappears. And it creates a sense of disorientation and confusion about what's what. So the idea of building trust and long-term communications that don't simply stop, when a particular project or a particular grant-funded, initiative ends. Thank you.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that. But my first, when you said distill, is make it personal. This is your life work. You're engaging with people that have everything on the line when working with you. Make it personal and think about how you're related to each other. And in our traditions and our learning, relationships are central, and all of that, whether it be plant, animal, just making it personal goes so long. And again, I'm coming from the other end. I was researched. People are reaching out to me as a community member. Now I'm on the other side of the table. One of my great learning experiences, was when I got a UC Davis email, and I reached out to a tribe, and they refused to talk to me because of my email, right? It said UC Davis, because all of a sudden I inherited everything that came before me within that institution. And that was a really big wake up call. And I was like, but you already know this. And so I was like, okay, so, but making it personal, think about how you relate to people and the way that you work with them.
Terrific. Well, we are coming up to the end, and I just wanted to thank you all, and I hope I hope those who have participated and who witnessed this session are coming away inspired the way I am, and that you'll stay tuned for our next panel. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for that. This session is now closed. So if everyone would join the next session from the lobby, thank you all again for a great discussion.